Okay, hello and welcome to Living in the Map, Episode 1. My name is Jerry Paffendorf, CEO of Regrid.com, and in this series I plan to chat with a wide variety of geospatial artists, activists, historians, futurists, and business leaders who are doing really interesting work that catches my attention. In this inaugural episode, I catch up with my good friend Andy Didorosi, founder of the Detroit Bus Company, among many other cool projects. Andy was kind enough to join me while I was still figuring out a flow and format, and our conversation covers all kinds of things. How we met in Detroit and how the city inspires us, how and why he built the Detroit Bus Company, thoughts on independent approaches to filling gaps in city services that coordinate with public services, how he pivoted to making a hand sanitizer called Arsenal of Clean when no one could ride buses during the pandemic, and many other things including thoughts on self-driving cars, virtual reality, and even somehow a mention of the Fermi paradox, which ponders why we haven't seen life on other planets yet. P.S. Thank you to my fellow Regrid co-founder, our CTO Larry Sheridan, for the intro music, which comes from his new album Sugar Pine. Find it on SoundCloud now under the artist name Glowland. And no, Larry did not ask me to plug the album, but there you go, Larry. I am always happy to be your street team. Now, without further ado, my conversation with Andy. Okay, I think we're recording. So, Andy, how are you, my friend? Thank you for joining me here.
I'm good. Sun is not shining here in Detroit. It's a wonderful day.
So you're in Detroit, I'm in Calumet, Michigan, and I guess I should introduce ourselves real quick, or introduce myself and let you introduce yourself. So, full confession, first timer in this video interview series I'm starting. My name is Jerry Paffendorf, co-founder and CEO of Regrid, Regrid.com. We provide nationwide land information. Look us up, free viewer, free mobile app, lots of cool data you can license for your own apps and business processes. And I'm here with my good friend, Andy Didorosi, who I had the pleasure of also seeing in person. Even though Andy's in Detroit, he took the 10-hour drive up to the Keweenaw Peninsula to lovely, freezing cold, covered in snow, Calumet, Michigan, recently, a week or two ago. So, Andy, how are you? First off, how's Detroit? You mentioned the weather a little bit. What's going on?
Excellent. I've been chasing sunrises lately, so I just got back from Belle Isle, our little island park here, to go say hi to the sun. Freighters were going by. There was a freighter hauling asphalt, which I didn't know you could do.
Okay.
Things are good. I'm the founder of the Detroit Bus Company. That's the company people most know me for, the DetroitBus.com, the social benefit bus company. But I encountered a tiger in an old auto plant, built a self-driving fire truck. We'll get into all kinds of stuff, but I'm generally a maker, creator, entrepreneur person here in Detroit, and sometimes end up accidentally doing marketing too.
You're definitely a man of many talents, and I think it's sort of interesting just to like try to connect multiple threads that we've had together over time. You know, starting the show, there's sort of like a few reasons, you know, for me to do it, and I was thinking about, you know, different guests and people to talk to. I was like, you know, my intention is to talk to interesting people doing stuff in like mapping, geospatial, location intelligence, but not like overly literally, and not like all industry stuff. Like I'm really interested in talking to artists and creative people, and you know, people just kind of doing cool projects and not necessarily building big businesses around that kind of stuff. And you know, I don't always think of like transportation and logistics in that same space. It obviously is. You know, we have customers that use our data who do transportation and logistics and delivery and things of that nature. And I was like, what could I talk to Andy about? And it was like, damn it, no, this makes total sense. Like, you know, our experience of being inspired by stuff in Detroit, which I think is an experience that we share. You know, funny how we met too, right? This would have been like 2010. We met at a speakeasy in downtown Detroit, Cafe de Mongos, and you were reviewing a truck that had made the claim that it was strong enough to pull down a house, right?
F450, yeah, 2011 F450 dually for the truck humans amongst us.
Yeah, and this is, you know, this is very Detroit and very that time period. It so happens that I was involved in a project that was trying to deal with basically a collapsed, fire damaged, dilapidated house, and we needed some way to start pulling it apart. So we said, do you want to get together tomorrow or the next day and put some things around the house and try to pull it down? And you were up for it, right? And we were up for it. And that's a very odd alignment of the stars, I think, to find that.
Yeah, it was I think it was the next morning. We were at the speakeasy until, you know, what, bar time. And then I remember being there the next day at like 9 a.m. and we were cutting holes in the house to wrap a chain around it. And spoiler alert, you just cannot pull a house down with a pickup truck. It doesn't work that way. We
It
found
sort
we
of
could pull
works.
down pieces of the house, but
Piece of the house. And if people are, visual analogy for this, it's almost like trying to like it's like putting like a steel wire around a block of cheese and pulling it more so like cuts through it than it does topples the cheese, if that makes sense. So anyway, but no, I share that just because I know we've had so many kind of mutual influences and inspirations in Detroit, and myself and my team really went down the rabbit hole of all the land issues and opportunities in Detroit, right? Just like thinking spatially about the need to know who owns things in the city and what's at risk of foreclosure and what needs to be repaired and how you can use geospatial and parcel information to plan. And you've been much more on the edge of being inspired by cars and transportation and logistics and just kind of the gaps and kind of getting people around in the city, right? So like tell me about that. I mean, and you've got a longer history in Detroit than I do and did. I was in town for 11 years until the pandemic, but you've got a longer history and just kind of more inspiration tied back to like the Motor City part of like Detroit than I do. So where did that all come from?
Yeah. I grew up here, so I've watched the city change. I remember coming down as a little kid, and I couldn't see out of the window sideways, but I could look up and know where I was based on like the tall objects passing by, like the Hammer Nail sign and the Fox Theater marquee. And so I always, got downtown in a minivan, and then I started coming down myself as a young adult to look around and drive around the city and traipse through old abandoned factories. And then I just got so frustrated with how bad public transit was. I traveled a little bit, and then you go to New York or you go to San Francisco, and there's just transit. You just hop on a thing and it gets you somewhere. And people demand that out of their cities, like young people especially. And so I was like, why in God's name can we not have transit here in the city? Like, we put the world on wheels. Like, it's not a new thing. It's actually a very old thing. And we had it. We had streetcar rails everywhere. And so I ended up just studying transit, just trying to be a fly on the wall. And by not knowing all of the complicated city politics, actually just looking at it from a first principles basis, and found myself just so frustrated by it. Because really, transit is just a traveling repairman problem. We all are familiar with the traveling salesman, where you're trying to make all these different points work in the most efficient route. Traveling repairman being like, well, you don't instantly complete the boarding or unboarding of this thing, and these people have different intentions. How can we get a group of people to want to go somewhere together on a vehicle large enough to be efficient, to go from cars to buses? And I just got fascinated by this fractal issue where the more you look at it and the more you dive in, the deeper and more challenging it gets. And then you add on the layer of humans and politics and money and racism and the Fed and all that. And it's a lifetime. It's a multiple lifetime problem to dig into.
Yeah. And so what to say about that? Because, people from Detroit will know all this stuff. People who are not from Detroit, I feel like sometimes don't know how really like interesting Detroit is, sometimes because of the problems that you're facing that you have to surmount, kind of make you think like differently. Like I know, I've always kind of like stereotyped this where, for many years, and I think this is kind of changing a bit now, but it was like if you wanted to be really successful or the best at something, there was really only like a few places that you could go. Like you'd go to New York City or you'd go to San Francisco or you'd go to LA or maybe you'd go to an Austin or a Boston or something like that. But Detroit really is like the Manhattan or whatever you want to call it. I feel like of like creative pressures for like thinking about a lot of these issues differently because you see these gaps in the systems, right? Like in Detroit, you still can't even take a shuttle from the airport to downtown unless I'm wrong about that, right?
A little bit. There's like there's a thing that comes a couple times a day now. So as long as you're willing to wait around for 2 hours and pay, I think it's like $18. No.
But even that's pretty recent, right? Like, 'cause that was like a forever thing where it was just like
3 months ago. Yeah. It's like 3 months ago. Yeah. So it's a long-term screwed up thing, but this is a pressure cooker for all of society's issues. Redlining, exclusion, deed restrictions, just all of these. I'm looking out the window to the backyard right now because there's like a half fallen down bar right behind my house that I look at every day. And people drive around this town and they think to themselves, like, why is this stuff not fixed? Like, shouldn't someone buy these poor buildings and fix them up? And it's like, it is far more complicated than that. You've got owners that don't want to sell. It's impossible to get the money together to fix these things up. It's just constant. You just grab onto one house. I mean, you had this experience. You had 2 houses side by side, and you're looking at, where's $200,000 a piece going to come from to do these homes? Like, where does that money come out of? Because no bank's going to give it to you. And so that it's just that problem multiplied.
Yeah. So then you get all this interesting DIY bootstrapping, kind of like middle stages on stuff to try to fill that in. Yeah. So you're making me think right now. So part of the space that you're in with the bus company is that interesting intersection of, like, ideally you would think there'd be these, bigger investments in public systems and regional systems too, because obviously in Detroit, in Metro Detroit, this is a huge problem. Like, there's Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne County, and Detroit dominates Wayne County, and there's just not a lot of cooperation for lots of reasons, like you said.
Yeah.
Historic redlining and racism, and city-suburb divide being, perhaps like the marquee issue on there. But so that leaves room for this kind of like private innovation, I'll call it. I know private sounds kind of funny to me in this too, but it's just kind of like independent or individuals, maybe even like a better word, right? Because I know private has connotations of like, this is mine and I'm gonna dominate this. And I think this might be an interesting segue into this. So like Mary and I have recently been watching Super Pumped, which is the Uber docudrama about the creation of Uber. And this is very much a story of like a megalomaniacal character, I guess you would say in this case, right? I'm not here to judge other people, but that's certainly the character type that's played up of like, everything in government is like broken and stupid. Okay. And I'm speaking on behalf of Travis K and the way that this, can put together in series right now. Yeah. Everything is broken and stupid. And taxis are, the mob essentially. And it's Uber's job to superimpose on top of this system, which is blessed by government, some new private, better way of doing things that doesn't really have to play by the literal rules of the road, so to speak, in this case, right?
Right.
And it's very interesting. I remember when, this is like, I don't know, a small confession. I remember when Uber first came to Detroit, I was aware that, Detroit was definitely lagging behind in smartphone adoptions at the time. And I even forget what year this would have been. Do you remember what year they came to town? I feel like it was maybe.
Oh boy. I have my Uber t-shirt because I went to the launch party at MoCAD. 2013, 2014?
Somewhere in there. But I remember thinking at first, it was like, I don't really know if this is going to work here because for just many reasons. Even though I'd had those awful experiences, just even on the cab side, not even the busing side, of like calling somebody and just hoping they're going to show up and having them not show up and missing flights and all this kind of stuff. I was still kind of like, I don't know if this is really going to work. But I feel like as soon as that service was launched, just a surprising number of people of all kinds just started using it because it was so much better. It was like, oh my God, this was just so absolutely life-changing in the city versus the cab system that was in place. And I don't know if you can like riff on this sort of like picture of like how, when you're doing these independent projects that do interface with the city, do interface with permissions, do interface with existing transportation, how is that experience gone? Like, what have you learned from it? How has that maybe changed over time? And how has that kind of like put you maybe into like thinking about certain niches for what you can do with transportation and logistics that are either easier or faster to permission, but just that whole interplay between like, let's build a new system versus like plug into the stuff that needs certification.
How long you got, Jerry?
Yeah, I mean, look, let's keep going until we run out of like interesting guests here. So try to give it to me short, but I know that's a big one.
No. It really all came home to me when we ended up in like a centerfold feature in some libertarian magazine about like public transit not needed, private solution. Look at this, and none of that was present when I started the bus company. I started the bus company more as a protest piece to say, if a 22-year-old can buy a bus and run it on this route that the public system was supposed to be running and then didn't, why can't you idiots get it together? With your like tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, all this it's not a question of the bus, it's a question of the politics. And it just spiraled from there. Every time you take a public bus ride in a major city, it's subsidized 90 to 95%. So that $2 you pay, it actually costs $25 to provide your ride. And that's fine. It's like, we don't question when we have water infrastructure, or we have public safety, or the fire department. That's just a service that's provided to lubricate society. It's the agreement that we have together. Transit's the same way. And so people look at public transit, or they look at the mail service, and they want these to be profitable services. It doesn't work that way. What they're doing is they're filling a gap. So I bought the bus to fill a gap, and I quickly realized that there was no private financial model that would rely on the people who need the rides to pay for the service, nor could we get enough grants or subsidies or begging, foundations to fund this thing. And we end up in this space where we got a major societal problem to solve that is arguably the definition of a market failure. There's no way to make a profitable business providing rides to people who can't afford rides. They normally just go and buy cars if they can afford it. And so we found this gap. And what the solution that we came up with over almost a decade of struggling was, let's do a high margin for profit, and we rent the buses for weddings and for corporate events on the weekends. And then during the week, we give kids free rides to school and after school programs. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done, but 11 years now running, the scale of what we're able to do is not nearly big enough for what we're trying to impact. And so when you look at an Uber, yes, it is better than the taxi system that we had, because the government system of regulated taxis, the medallions, the regulations, and that was the best you can do with an analog system to say, let's maintain somewhat of a minimum quality of taxi cab service. Now you go to like Manhattan, pre-Uber, the taxi cabs were fine. They work. The city regulated those well because they had a tight control over that island. Here in Detroit, the taxi cabs are wild. I mean, totally.
New York is always off the charts different. New York just has that insane density. You know what I mean? Like, you're not
exactly.
At least in 21st century Detroit, I imagine, like, you went back 30, 40, 50 years, you might find that density in certain areas, but you're not going to find it. Right.
It's a coordination issue. Because you've got people who want rides. You've got this huge area, 140 square miles. And how are you going to get them effectively a car to get them to the airport over the phone? No technology involved. It's a difficult problem, especially if you're a dispatcher sitting in a booth with a bunch of paper around you. How do you coordinate all these people to do this stuff in a low density situation? 600,000 people over 140 square miles, and almost entirely cash based too. How are you going to do that? And so you can see why it isn't any individual contributor within that system that makes it bad. No one company, no one driver, no one cab, but the system itself doesn't work. And so an Uber shows up that can verify reputation through reviews. They do some vehicle inspections. They do the paperwork checks. And by the way, you've got people who are hungry to provide rides because they're charging 2, 3, 4x what a normal taxi cab ride is. All of a sudden, you've got a complete. You took a near market failure and you turned it into a market success, but with a lot of subsidies. You've got a lot of Silicon Valley subsidy money on top of that. And so again, just like the buses, it's never as simple as, well, Uber good, taxi bad. It's like, well, no, it's spending Silicon Valley bucks to make the Uber rides better than the taxis last for a while, but we don't know if there's going to be a long-term durable.
And forgive my ignorance in that, because I really have not kept up to date. You kind of start to take it for granted that actually can self-sustain. But what are the latest economic check-ins on the Uber, Lyft, et cetera?
Well, a lot of people think that it's Uber and Lyft, but it's really like Uber and then Lyft. Like the scale of Uber and the volume of rides of Uber is so many. So I don't know what the multiple is. I'd be lying if I made up a number, but I think it's in the 10x to 12x multiple, like so much bigger than Lyft. And Lyft positions itself as the Pepsi to Uber's Coke, but it's like not even close.
Probably more like RC Cola or something like that. But
right, Mr. Pibb. So it's really just Uber, and it's not sustainable. The rides are not they're still burning cash. They found profitability on the Uber Eats side, especially with the pandemic, but the ride service is not succeeding financially. The AV service that they were supposed to come up with, that they hired all these people and stole all these people away from, it's not coming to fruition. They canceled that program. They're just going to buy an AV solution from someone else, an autonomous vehicle solution. But that in itself is going to be an unmitigated disaster for road congestion and the environment, because you're going to have all these empty cars doing all these deadhead miles to go pick up people to drive them to go get a smoothie and back. It's not, it's fine for Uber. It'll be a solution for Uber and for the shareholders, but it's going to be a terrible thing for the rest of us. We're sort of holding our breath until autonomous vehicles show up, but it's going to be more of the same, this sort of hyper feudalism that we're moving into, and which is not even a fringe opinion, that we're moving into this oligarchy essentially, and giving away the last thing. These driving jobs is right. Going to be bad.
Well, let's bookmark that, because I do want to ask you about just some of your thoughts on autonomous and how that plays in here. But you mentioned, first trying to get the business model to work, where one of the things you learned is like using these higher margin, more profitable tours and weddings and things of that nature to help subsidize or offset some of the more community oriented programs and rides. I know you've done stuff with like busing kids from school and different things of that nature, but how this also relates to like what you've done to try to like scale this, because I know you worked on a project like a bus OS, Farebox, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Like what's the thinking there, and like, and is that something that people can still like, try to plug into or contribute to if they're interested in doing similar things in other cities, similar kinds of problem solving?
Yeah, we basically, Farebox.io, gotta market it. It took all of our learnings from the bus company and turned them into software. We codified the bus company into software. So the things that are spatial, like buses on a map, schedule in time, money with time, like all the things that you need to run a bus company, are actually very compatible with software. Like they're quite simpatico. And so software for bus companies and for transit was actually made a very long time ago. We're talking like the early 90s, mainframe stuff, server-based stuff. And some of those solutions are still around. And so most old school bus companies, because transit in general is a very mature industry by definition. It's been around for such a long time. You've got a few very entrenched players. They run on this old server-based software, which is ancient. It's also super expensive, super slow. You pay per seat to log into a Windows NT server. It's actually wild how dusty it is. And so we bought into all those systems, and we tried and we switched through different ones. But we found a continual issue that they were fine for operating the bus company on the back end. Once you already had agreement from your customer, then it would help you deliver the service quite well. But getting the customer to agree to the service, to understand what high volume information they're giving you, like think about one wedding. You've got a church, you've got a reception, you've got where you're picking up the group, you've got how much they're paying you for, when the break time is. I mean, you understand all this. There's so much information that you receive from the wedding planner or the wedding booker, and that's just one wedding for one day when you've got a fleet of 15 buses. You've got to standardize all that so that your frontline team can deliver it, and then get it to them in a way that has as few duplication errors as possible. And by the way, you've got to do this 7 days a week for 15 buses, and we're a small fleet. And so it's just this huge bandwidth issue. And so we looked at all this and said, we just have to build our own thing. And so I hired a mutual friend of ours, Alan Langren, to help us build the software. We worked from 2020 until 2022 to build this. We use it every day. And we also integrate, I don't think I have one here, but we integrated this little box called a particle. So we even have a gateway on the vehicles now that we get to see where they're at, because we realize any of the telematics stuff that's out there doesn't really deliver what we need it to do. And so the cost of making software is getting low enough that companies like ours can actually build their own solutions. But it was a lot of work. So we made it available as a SaaS solution for other transportation fleets. We call them fleet-based businesses, because it's not just bus companies. If you run a lawn care service, you could use Farebox to run your thing. And really, it's like Shopify for fleets, essentially.
Interesting. And this is just a quick side note, because you reminded me, I'd totally forgotten about this, but my colleague, Matt Hampel, our chief data officer at Regrid, he did Code for America in Detroit. And I remember one of the projects he worked on was putting the bus trackers in the buses. It was trying to solve that problem of you're sitting at the bus stop. How can I see it move around in such a manner? So for Farebox, what is there kind of like a a group of people or a customer or an investor or a kind of project that you want to talk to that could interface with that, or where is that as far as something other people could plug into right now?
Well, we're going to open it up soon with an API that you could use Farebox as a basis for other things. Like if you wanted to expand it to be, an OS for ice cream trucks, you could do so. Like we really want to be a platform that you can stand
It's a
on.
cool idea. I mean, just that whole OS for kind of moving stuff around
Yeah,
in time and space is it. I wouldn't know what to point to right now to do that. I wouldn't know what I
yeah,
precisely need it for, but when you're in this creative headspace around these things, like there's always ways to bend the instrument, so to speak. And it seems like a really cool instrument, right? It's like that's
yeah. Yeah, and so many of the issues shared between different fleet-based businesses or location-based businesses are similar. This asset, which is eating my bank account every single minute, needs to be utilized to its maximum effect, and it can only be in one place in time in a moment, and so I can't double book it. I hope that I get the most amount of money I can for this asset, or the most utility for this asset, or however you define that in this space and time, and then also who's driving this thing, like who's assigned to it, is it inspected? I mean, again, like running a bus company is this endless fractal of complexity that you can really dig into if you want. Most small companies just ignore most of that complexity and offer kind of a subpar service, but what we're trying to do is take all this enterprise level stuff, make it super simple and easy, like Fisher Price easy, and then make it available to everyone for a subscription. I mean, I know of course it's the SaaS marketing model, but taking these enterprise grade server based things and making them just available on a monthly fee versus a huge annual payment, I think is a way a lot of people can make success in the SaaS marketplace, software as a service.
so you mentioned autonomous vehicles before. I just got to ask because with what I guess I'll call the events of March 2020 and forward, where life sort of changed for a lot of us. I've not been in Detroit really, since I've been back for a couple trips, but I have not been living there since then. And just prior to leaving, I was elected to a neighborhood advisory council for the Ford project to renovate Michigan Central Station in Corktown, with their plans to turn that into their headquarters for autonomous and electric vehicles. So there was a lot of in addition to just being amazed that Ford was, rolling up their sleeves to renovate the train station,
Yeah,
just all of sort of the headiness around innovation related to autonomous vehicles, EV, and the offshoots. And by offshoots, I mean, there were bird scooters, there were Lime scooters. Ford is the spin scooter, right? So all of a sudden in Corktown, there's spin, there's all these there's just these different modes of on-demand, decentralized, get me from here to there kind of systems. I saw videos of food delivery robots in Corktown over the last year, and I'm like, wow, I wasn't expecting to necessarily see that. What is sort of the vibe in the scene at present? My guess is that it's not super advanced yet, but even seeing those things take place, is sort of surprising to just kind of have that stuff all in the air after it was pretty dormant as far as that kind of thinking. So what's your take on I guess any AV experiments in the city and any of those offshoots that may be happening? Anything interesting going on there? Or?
yeah, we see that little May Mobility. It's like a golf cart that seats 6 people,
Yep.
kind of driving this little loop downtown, and of
That's
course
been
it
doing
has an
that for some years
operator.
now. That's been doing
What's
that
that?
for a minute. That's been happening
Yeah,
for
yeah.
5 or 6 years almost, maybe
Yeah,
4.
and
Yeah.
of course they've got a bunch of investment, and it's one of those things where yes, robots are cool. Yes, maybe some of these dreary, repetitious jobs should be worked by robots, and they're infinitely attentive. There's a bunch of beneficial reasons to do so, but in the age of deepening inequality, do we take away all of these pretty well paying jobs? So
Yep.
it's contentious. It's hard, and our AV is going to solve a lot of the big problems that we're facing. It really only solves one thing, which is profitability for major fleet owners and people who run large corporations. That's truly the only thing that I can see it benefiting right now. Humans are quite good drivers. Even though we have 30,000 traffic deaths a year, That's amazing compared to the hundreds of millions of miles that we drive every single year as a
Not to
nation.
digress, but honestly, like it seems like a dumb thing to say, but it may be worth like, bearing repeating and appreciation. I'm shocked at how good people are at driving. Whenever
Amazing.
I drive back and forth, or I did like almost twice a month for a while from Detroit to Calumet. It's a 10.5 hour trip, all weather, all conditions, night, day. And sometimes when
Yep.
you're out there, I'm just appreciating like, what is my brain even doing right now? Like all I'm thinking about is like one line on the side, one line in the center. And like I mess up playing a video game. I don't mess up driving. I just say I don't know what it is in the human brain where that actually works, but like, for of course all the anything bad that happens is super serious, but you're right, it is incredible how good we actually are at driving.
Yeah, the table stakes are much higher in real life than a video
Yeah.
game, so you have like a survival instinct to not
Right.
crash that car. But also, I think we're just super well tuned to object detection and keeping things, and perceiving like how this thing is moving. Like it's also a gorgeous system. Like look at how we've made this system of fixed lines and dotted lines and signs,
Yeah.
and that you just sort of perceive naturally. It's why autonomous vehicles are so difficult, is because there's really this like iceberg of processing going on, all these decisions that we make that we don't even really know. I mean, driver's ed is really you training your organic machine to learn how to process all these
Yeah.
signals. And it's incredible. And especially when you go to like an India or an Italy and you watch just the crazy cacophony of scooters and little trucks and big trucks and everything just all working together in very little collisions, very little injury. And so it's like, yeah, AV's kind of neat, but also like, is this the future that we're very excited about? Like, this is the big innovation, is like a car that can drive itself. I just don't feel as pumped about that. Like this isn't the future we were
Interesting.
promised, Jerry.
Yeah.